The morning sun barely peeked through the thick clouds when Maria Santos stepped off the military transport truck. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the heavy pack on her shoulders. At 22 years old, she never imagined she would be standing on foreign soil, wearing camouflage uniform that felt too big for her small frame. The other soldiers around her looked confident and ready for action, but Maria felt like she was drowning in uncertainty. She had joined the army not because she dreamed of being a soldier, but because her family desperately needed money. Her younger brother needed surgery, and her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. The military promised steady pay, benefits, and a chance to serve her country. What they didn't mention was how terrifying it would be to hold a weapon for the first time, or how lonely she would feel surrounded by hundreds of people. During basic training, Maria struggled with almost everything. She was the smallest person in her unit, barely meeting the minimum height requirement. When others finished their obstacle courses in record time, Maria would be gasping for air, coming in last. Her drill sergeant, Sergeant Thompson, seemed to take special pleasure in pointing out her weaknesses in front of everyone else. "Santos," he would yell across the training ground. "If you can't carry your own weight, how do you expect to carry your fellow soldiers when they need you?" The words stung because Maria knew he was right. She wasn't built like the others. She didn't have the natural strength or the aggressive attitude that seemed to come so easily to her peers. But Maria had something else that her instructors didn't notice at first. She was incredibly observant. While others focused on showing off their physical abilities, Maria watched everything carefully. She noticed which techniques worked best for different body types. She studied how the most successful soldiers moved, breathed, and positioned themselves during exercises. Slowly, she began to adapt these lessons to work for her smaller frame. Her accuracy with weapons surprised everyone, including herself. During shooting practice, while bigger soldiers struggled to control the recoil, Maria's smaller hands and steady breathing helped her hit targets with remarkable precision. She learned to use her size as an advantage rather than seeing it as a weakness. When others rushed through tactical exercises, Maria moved carefully and strategically, often completing missions more efficiently than her physically stronger teammates. Despite her improvements, many of her fellow soldiers still saw her as the weak link. They would make jokes about her size or question whether she belonged in combat situations. Maria tried not to let their comments affect her, but late at night in her bunk she wondered if they were right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this life. Maybe she should have found another way to help her family. The turning point came during a particularly challenging training exercise. The unit was practicing urban warfare scenarios, moving through a mock city built specifically for military training. Teams were assigned to capture specific buildings while defending against simulated enemy attacks. Maria's team was struggling because their designated marksmen had been eliminated early in the exercise. Without their long-range support, the team found themselves pinned down by instructors playing enemy forces. The team leader was frustrated and running out of options. That's when Maria spoke up, something she rarely did during these exercises. She had been observing the situation and noticed a pattern in how the enemies were moving between buildings. "I can get a clear shot from the water tower," she said quietly to her team leader. "If I can get up there without being seen, I can cover the team's advance to the objective." The team leader looked skeptical. The water tower was at least 200 yards away, and getting there meant crossing open ground where enemy instructors could easily spot and eliminate her. But they were out of options, so he agreed to let her try. Maria removed most of her heavy equipment, keeping only her rifle and essential gear. She used her knowledge of the mock city's layout to find a route that would keep her hidden from the main enemy positions. Her small size allowed her to move through spaces that would have been impossible for larger soldiers. It took her nearly 30 minutes to reach the water tower, moving carefully and patiently. Once there, she climbed to the top and set up her shooting position. From that height, she could see the entire battlefield. She radioed her team and began providing precise information about enemy movements. More importantly, she was able to eliminate key enemy positions that had been stopping her team's advance. Her team successfully completed the objective, and the exercise ended with high praise from the instructors. For the first time since joining the military, Maria felt like she truly belonged. Her teammates looked at her differently now, with respect rather than doubt. Sergeant Thompson even pulled her aside after the exercise to tell her that her tactical thinking and shooting skills were among the best he had seen. From that day forward, Maria's confidence grew steadily. She began to see her unique qualities not as limitations but as special abilities that made her valuable to any team. Her careful observation skills helped her unit avoid dangerous situations. Her precise shooting ability made her an excellent support soldier. Most importantly, her determination to prove herself had made her mentally tougher than many soldiers who relied only on physical strength. As her training neared completion, Maria received word that her unit would be deployed to an active conflict zone. The news filled her with both excitement and terror. This would be her chance to prove that she truly belonged in the military, but it would also mean facing real danger for the first time. The practice exercises and training scenarios would be replaced by genuine life-or-death situations. Her family was proud but worried when she called to tell them about the deployment. Her mother cried, begging her to be careful. Her younger brother, now recovering well from his surgery thanks to Maria's military benefits, told her he was proud to have such a brave sister. These conversations reminded Maria why she had joined the military in the first place, and gave her the motivation to face whatever challenges awaited her. The night before deployment, Maria lay in her bunk thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer the scared, uncertain young woman who had stepped off the transport truck months ago. She had discovered inner strength she never knew existed, and had earned the respect of her peers through hard work and determination. Tomorrow, she would face the ultimate test of everything she had learned. The military base in the conflict zone looked nothing like the training facilities back home. Sandbags and concrete barriers surrounded every building, and the constant sound of distant explosions reminded everyone that danger was never far away. Maria felt her stomach tighten as she looked around at the battle-worn faces of soldiers who had been stationed there for months. Their eyes held a hardness that came from seeing too much violence and losing too many friends. Captain Williams, the commanding officer who briefed Maria's unit, spoke in a matter-of-fact tone that somehow made the dangerous situation feel even more real. "This isn't training anymore," he said, looking directly at each new soldier. "The enemy here is experienced, well-armed, and they know this terrain better than we do. Your job is to follow orders, watch each other's backs, and make it home alive." Maria was assigned to Alpha Squad, led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran with 12 years of combat experience. The other members of her squad had all seen action before, and she could sense their skepticism about having a rookie among them. Corporal Jenkins, a large man from Texas, made it clear that he didn't think women belonged in combat roles. "No offense, Santos," he said during their first squad meeting, "but when bullets start flying, I need to know that everyone can carry their weight." Private First Class Chen, who served as the squad's communications specialist, was more welcoming but still cautious around Maria. "Just stay close and do exactly what Rodriguez tells you," he advised. "Your first firefight is nothing like training. Everything happens faster, louder, and more confusing than you expect." The first few weeks at the base involved routine patrols and checkpoint duties. Maria quickly learned that even seemingly safe activities could turn dangerous without warning. During her third patrol, their convoy hit an improvised explosive device that destroyed the lead vehicle. The explosion was so loud and sudden that Maria's ears rang for hours afterward. Watching the medics work on wounded soldiers from the damaged vehicle gave her a harsh introduction to the realities of war. She also learned to read the subtle signs that indicated potential threats. The way civilians looked at passing patrols could reveal whether danger was nearby. Empty streets in areas that should be busy often meant that locals had been warned to stay inside. These observations, combined with her natural attention to detail, made her valuable for spotting potential ambush sites and suspicious activities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez began to appreciate Maria's careful approach to dangerous situations. While other soldiers sometimes rushed into areas without fully assessing the risks, Maria always took time to observe and analyze before moving. This cautious attitude had already prevented the squad from walking into two potentially dangerous situations. The relationship between Maria and her squad mates gradually improved as they worked together. Corporal Jenkins began to respect her shooting accuracy after she successfully eliminated a sniper who had been harassing their patrol route for days. Her precise shot from nearly 300 yards away impressed even the most skeptical members of the unit. Private Chen appreciated how quickly she learned to use the communication equipment and how calmly she handled emergency radio calls during stressful situations. But Maria's biggest test came during her first real combat engagement. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning to attack a nearby village that housed several families who had been cooperating with Allied forces. Alpha Squad was part of a larger operation designed to intercept the attackers before they could reach the village. The mission began before dawn, with multiple squads moving through mountainous terrain to establish defensive positions around the village. Maria carried extra ammunition for the squad's heavy machine gun, along with her standard rifle and equipment. The weight of the gear made the difficult hike even more challenging, but she kept pace with her squad mates without complaint. They reached their assigned position just as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Rodriguez positioned the squad behind a rocky outcropping that provided good cover while offering clear fields of fire toward the most likely enemy approach routes. Maria was assigned to provide overwatch from a slightly elevated position that gave her a clear view of the entire area. For several hours, nothing happened. The morning was peaceful, with only the sounds of birds and distant village activities breaking the silence. Maria began to wonder if the intelligence reports had been wrong or if the enemy had decided not to attack after all. But Rodriguez remained alert, constantly scanning the terrain through his binoculars and checking in with other squad positions via radio. Then Chen's voice crackled through the radio with urgent news. Movement spotted to the northeast. Approximately 15 individuals with weapons, moving toward the village through the forest. Maria adjusted her position and focused her rifle scope in that direction. At first, she couldn't see anything, but gradually she began to notice subtle signs of movement among the trees. The enemy force was moving carefully, using the forest cover to conceal their approach. They were still several hundred yards away, but Maria could see that they were well equipped and moving with the coordination of experienced fighters. Her heart began to beat faster as she realized that this was actually happening. This wasn't training or simulation. These were real enemies who wanted to hurt innocent people and kill anyone who tried to stop them. Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece with calm, professional instructions. Alpha Squad, prepare to engage on my command. Santos, I want you to focus on any enemy fighters who try to flank our position. Your job is to watch our sides and rear while the rest of us engage the main force. Maria acknowledged the order and began systematically scanning the areas to the left and right of the main enemy group. Her training had taught her that experienced fighters often split their forces, sending some members around the sides to attack defenders from unexpected angles. Sure enough, after several minutes of observation, she spotted 3 enemy fighters moving through a small ravine that would allow them to approach the village from a completely different direction. Rodriguez, I have 3 individuals moving through the ravine to our west, she reported calmly. They appear to be trying to flank the village defenses. Her observation proved crucial because none of the other defensive positions had noticed this smaller group. If they had reached the village undetected, they could have caused significant casualties among the civilians. The battle was about to begin in earnest, and Maria knew that everything she had learned during training would be put to the ultimate test. Her hands were steady on her rifle, her breathing was controlled, and her mind was focused on the task ahead. She had proven herself during training and routine operations, but real combat would determine whether she truly belonged among these warriors. The first shots of the battle rang out like thunder across the quiet valley. Maria watched through her rifle scope as muzzle flashes erupted from the forest where the main enemy force had taken position. The peaceful morning was instantly transformed into chaos as bullets whizzed overhead and explosive rounds detonated against the rocky outcropping. Where Alpha Squad had taken cover, Rodriguez immediately began coordinating the squad's response, his voice calm and professional despite the intensity of the situation. Jenkins, suppress that machine gun position at 2 o'clock. Chen, get me communication with Bravo Squad and tell them we're taking heavy fire from the northeast. The squad moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing exactly what to do without hesitation. Maria kept her focus on the 3 enemy fighters she had spotted moving through the ravine. They were closer now, maybe 200 yards away, and she could see that they carried automatic rifles and what appeared to be explosive devices. If they reached the village, they could cause terrible damage before other defenders could stop them. She lined up her shot on the lead fighter, controlling her breathing exactly as she had been taught. The rifle felt familiar and comfortable in her hands, and she was confident in her ability to hit the target at this range. But just as she was about to squeeze the trigger, something went terribly wrong. The rifle made a strange clicking sound instead of firing. Maria quickly checked the safety and trigger mechanism, but everything appeared to be in the correct position. She tried again, but the weapon simply would not fire. Her heart began to race as she realized that her rifle was jammed, and the enemy fighters were getting closer to the village with every passing second. "Rodriguez!" she called out over the noise of the battle. "My rifle is jammed. I can't get a shot on the flanking group." But Rodriguez was busy directing return fire against the main enemy force and coordinating with other squad positions. The sound of gunfire and explosions made communication difficult, and Maria wasn't sure if he had heard her report. She quickly tried the standard procedures for clearing a jammed rifle, working as fast as possible, while keeping one eye on the enemy fighters in the ravine. The first technique didn't work. Neither did the second. The rifle seemed to be completely non-functional, and precious seconds were ticking away while the threat to the village grew more serious. Jenkins noticed her problem and shouted over the noise of battle. "Santos, what's wrong with your weapon?" When she explained the situation, his face showed the same concern she was feeling. The flanking group was now only about 150 yards from the village, and if they weren't stopped soon, they would be able to launch their attack on the civilian population. "Can you fix it?" Jenkins asked while continuing to fire at the main enemy position. Maria tried 2 more clearing techniques, but nothing worked. The rifle was completely useless and she was beginning to panic. During all her training, she had never encountered a weapon malfunction that couldn't be quickly resolved. This was the worst possible time for equipment failure. Chen, who had been monitoring radio communications from other units, suddenly looked up with alarm. "The other squads are reporting that more enemy forces are approaching from the south. They can't send anyone to help us with the flanking group. We're on our own." Maria looked at her useless rifle, then at the enemy fighters who were now less than 100 yards from innocent families. Children and elderly people were depending on Alpha Squad to protect them, and her weapon failure was putting all of them at risk. She felt a surge of frustration and anger that threatened to overwhelm her training and discipline. But then something clicked in her mind. During one of her training exercises, an instructor had said something that she had never forgotten. "A good soldier finds a way to complete the mission, even when everything goes wrong. Weapons can fail, plans can change, but the mission always comes first." Maria looked around desperately for alternatives. Jenkins was busy with the heavy machine gun, suppressing the main enemy force. Chen was coordinating communications and couldn't leave his position. Rodriguez was directing the overall squad response and couldn't break away to deal with the flanking threat. It was up to her to find a solution, but without a working rifle, her options seemed extremely limited. Then she noticed something that gave her an idea. About 30 yards to her left, there was a small pile of rocks that someone had stacked during the construction of a temporary communications post. The rocks weren't very large, but they were heavy enough to cause serious damage if thrown with sufficient force and accuracy. Maria had always been athletic, and during her childhood, she had been the star pitcher on her school's softball team. Her coaches had praised her accuracy and arm strength, saying she could hit any target she aimed for. Could those skills from her youth help her in this desperate situation? She quickly calculated the distance to the enemy fighters and the trajectory she would need to use. It would be extremely difficult to hit moving targets at that range with thrown rocks, but it might be possible if she timed everything perfectly. More importantly, even if she couldn't hit the fighters directly, she might be able to slow them down or force them to take cover, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. Without telling anyone what she was planning, Maria began gathering the largest rock she could find. She needed to move quickly because the enemy fighters were now less than 75 yards from the village outskirts. In just a few more minutes, they would be close enough to launch their attack on the civilians. Rodriguez noticed her unusual activity and shouted a question, but the noise of battle made it impossible for her to explain her plan. She would have to act first and explain later. Taking the first rock in her hand, Maria stood up from behind her cover, exposing herself to potential enemy fire but gaining the throwing angle she needed. The lead enemy fighter was moving through a narrow section of the ravine, where the walls would limit his ability to dodge. Maria drew back her arm, aimed carefully, and threw the rock with all the strength and accuracy she could muster. The heavy stone flew through the air in a perfect arc, covering the distance faster than she had expected. The rock struck the lead enemy fighter in the shoulder with tremendous force, spinning him around and causing him to drop his weapon. The impact was so unexpected that he stumbled and fell, alerting his 2 companions that they had been discovered. They immediately began looking around for the source of the attack, their weapons raised and ready to fire. Maria was already reaching for her second rock when bullets began hitting the ground around her position. The enemy fighters had spotted her and were trying to eliminate the threat she posed to their mission. She dropped back behind cover as rounds ricocheted off the rocky outcropping, sending stone fragments flying in all directions. "Santos, what the hell are you doing?" Rodriguez shouted over the noise of battle. He had seen her expose herself to enemy fire and couldn't understand why she was throwing rocks instead of using her rifle. But there was no time to explain the situation properly. The injured enemy fighter was already getting back to his feet, and his companions were providing covering fire while trying to help him retrieve his weapon. Maria knew she needed to act quickly before the three fighters regrouped and continued their advance toward the village. The element of surprise was gone now, but she still had the advantage of elevated position and better cover. She gathered 3 more rocks, choosing the heaviest ones she could throw accurately at that distance. Standing up again, she immediately drew fire from the enemy position, but this time she was ready for it. She had chosen a spot where she could quickly duck back behind solid rock cover after making her throw. The second rock left her hand just as bullets began impacting around her position, and she dropped back to safety without seeing where it landed. Chen's voice came through her earpiece with excitement. "Direct hit. You got the second guy in the head. He's down." Maria felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with the grim reality of what she had just accomplished. In training, targets were just paper or electronic displays. In combat, every successful hit meant that someone's life had ended. But there was no time for reflection. The third enemy fighter was now alone, but he was also the most dangerous because he was angry and desperate. Maria could see through a gap in the rocks that he was trying to drag his injured companion to safety, while continuing to fire in her direction. His shots were getting more accurate as he figured out exactly where she was positioned. "Rodriguez, I need covering fire," Maria called out. "Give me 30 seconds and I can finish this." Without hesitation, Rodriguez directed Jenkins to turn the heavy machine gun toward the ravine. The sustained fire from the larger weapon forced the remaining enemy fighter to take cover, giving Maria the opportunity she needed. She stood up with her third rock, but this time the enemy fighter was ready for her. Even while taking cover from the machine gun fire, he managed to get off several accurate shots in her direction. Maria felt one bullet pass so close to her head that she could hear it whistling through the air. Another round hit the rock wall just inches from her face, showering her with stone fragments. But her focus remained absolutely steady. All those hours of softball practice in her youth had trained her to maintain concentration even under pressure. The enemy fighter was about 60 yards away now, partially hidden behind a boulder but still visible enough to present a target. Maria calculated the trajectory, adjusted for the wind, and threw the rock with every ounce of strength and skill she possessed. The stone struck the enemy fighter directly in the forehead with such force that he immediately collapsed. His weapon fell from his hands and clattered down the rocky slope of the ravine. The flanking attack had been completely neutralized through Maria's quick thinking and incredible accuracy with improvised weapons, but the main battle was far from over. The enemy force in the forest had regrouped and was launching a coordinated assault on all the defensive positions around the village. Maria could hear Rodriguez coordinating with other squad leaders as they tried to maintain their defensive line against superior numbers. "Bravo squad is taking heavy casualties," Chen reported through the radio. "They're requesting immediate support or they'll have to fall back." This was exactly what the enemy wanted, to break through the defensive line and reach the village where they could cause maximum damage to the civilian population. Maria finally managed to clear the jam in her rifle using a technique that required partially disassembling the weapon. It took several minutes of careful work while bullets continued to fly overhead, but eventually she heard the satisfying click that indicated the firing mechanism was working properly again. She quickly reassembled the weapon and tested it with a single shot toward the forest. "My rifle is working again," she reported to Rodriguez. "What do you need me to do?" The squad leader looked at her with new respect. He had witnessed her innovative solution to the flanking threat and was beginning to understand that Maria brought unique skills to the team that went far beyond standard military training. "I need you to provide precision fire support for Bravo squad," Rodriguez instructed. "They're pinned down about 200 yards to our south. The enemy has them trapped behind a stone wall, but there's a machine gun position that's preventing them from moving. Can you eliminate that threat? Maria studied the area through her rifle scope and quickly located the enemy machine gun position. It was well concealed among the trees and protected by natural cover, making it a difficult target for the heavier weapons that other squads were using. But her precision shooting skills and patience made her ideal for this type of challenge. "I can see the position," she confirmed. "Give me 2 minutes to set up for the shot." Maria moved to a different firing position that offered a better angle on the target. The distance was at the extreme range of her rifle's effectiveness, and the target was partially obscured by vegetation. But she had made similar shots during training exercises. She controlled her breathing, steadied her weapon against a stable rest, and began the careful process of lining up the shot. The enemy machine gunner was firing in short bursts, briefly exposing himself each time he engaged targets. Maria would have to time her shot perfectly to hit him during one of these brief moments of visibility. The sound of battle continued all around her, but Maria's world narrowed down to just her rifle scope and the target she was trying to hit. This was the moment when all her training, natural ability, and determination would come together to make the difference between success and failure for her entire unit. Maria waited with the patience of a hunter, her finger resting lightly on the trigger as she watched the enemy machine gun position through her scope. The gunner was disciplined and experienced, never exposing himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Each time he fired, he would pop up from behind his cover, send a burst of rounds toward Bravo Squad's position, then immediately duck back down before return fire could reach him. She had been watching this pattern for almost 3 minutes, timing each exposure and looking for the perfect moment to take her shot. The distance was significant, nearly 250 yards, and the target would only be visible for perhaps 2 seconds at most. There would be no opportunity for a second shot if she missed. The radio crackled with increasing desperation from Bravo Squad. "We're running low on ammunition," their squad leader reported. "If we don't get relief soon, we'll have to abandon this position." Maria knew that losing Bravo Squad's defensive position would create a gap in the line that enemy forces could exploit to reach the village. Had also noticed something troubling during her observation of the target area. Additional enemy fighters were moving through the forest toward Bravo Squad's position, apparently planning to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Once they completed their positioning, Bravo Squad would be completely surrounded and eliminated. "Rodriguez, I count at least 6 more enemy fighters moving to flank Bravo Squad," Maria reported through her earpiece. "They'll be in position within the next few minutes." This information added even more urgency to her mission. She had to eliminate the machine gun position before the flanking attack could begin. The enemy gunner appeared again, and Maria began her final preparation for the shot. She controlled her breathing, letting half the air out of her lungs and holding steady. Her crosshairs settled on the exact spot where the gunner's head would appear during his next exposure. Every muscle in her body was relaxed except for her trigger finger, which was ready to apply the precise pressure needed to fire the rifle. But just as the enemy gunner began to rise from cover, an explosion erupted nearby, shaking the ground and disrupting Maria's aim. Enemy mortars had begun targeting the defensive positions, and the concussion from the blast threw off her carefully planned shot. The bullet passed harmlessly over the enemy position, and the gunner immediately ducked back down. "Damn it," Maria muttered under her breath. She had lost the element of surprise, and now the enemy position would be even more alert to the threat she posed. Worse yet, the mortar attack was getting more accurate with each round, indicating that enemy spotters had identified the main defensive positions and were directing fire accordingly. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with new urgency. "All positions, be advised that enemy reinforcements have been spotted approaching from the east. We're going to be outnumbered 3-1 in about 10 minutes. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Maria realized that her shot at the machine gun position might be the key to the entire battle's outcome. She shifted to a slightly different firing position, hoping to get a better angle on the target while avoiding the area where mortar rounds were landing. The new position offered less cover, but provided a clearer view of the enemy machine gun nest. It was a calculated risk that could either give her the shot she needed or expose her to enemy fire. Through her scope, Maria could see that the enemy gunner was becoming more aggressive, exposing himself for longer periods as he tried to suppress Bravo Squad's position. The increasing pressure from the flanking forces was making him confident that he could operate with less caution. This overconfidence might give Maria the opportunity she needed. She settled into her new position and began the aiming process again. This time she noticed something that could work to her advantage. There was a pattern to when the enemy gunner reloaded his weapon, approximately every 40 rounds, which took him about 15 seconds to complete. During the reload process, he stayed in a consistent position for the entire time, giving her a much larger window for an accurate shot. Maria began counting the rounds being fired from the enemy position. 25, 30, 35. She prepared herself for the shot, knowing that the next reload cycle would be her best opportunity. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate decreased, and her entire world focused down to the small circle of her rifle scope. 38, 39, 40. The enemy gunner ducked down to reload, and Maria could see the top of his helmet as he worked to replace the ammunition belt in his weapon. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Every aspect of her training, every hour of practice, every lesson about patience and precision came together in this single instant. She squeezed the trigger with steady, controlled pressure. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that was almost lost in the general noise of battle. Through her scope, Maria watched as her bullet found its target with devastating accuracy. The enemy machine gun position fell silent immediately. "Target down," she reported to Rodriguez. "Bravo squad should be able to move now." Almost immediately, she could hear the change in the battle's rhythm. Without the machine gun suppressing their movement, Bravo squad was able to reposition and engage the flanking forces that had been trying to surround them. But Maria's success had also drawn attention to her position. Enemy fighters in the forest had seen the muzzle flash from her rifle and were now directing concentrated fire toward her location. Bullets began impacting all around her position, forcing her to move quickly to avoid being hit. As she gathered her equipment to relocate, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. The enemy reinforcements that Rodriguez had mentioned were much closer than anyone had realized. She could see at least 20 fighters moving through the forest toward the village, and they would reach the outer defensive perimeter within minutes. "Rodriguez," she called urgently, "the reinforcements are almost here. We need to fall back or we'll be completely overrun." But as she looked back toward Alpha Squad's position, Maria realized that Rodriguez and the others were still heavily engaged with the original enemy force and might not be able to disengage in time to establish a new defensive line. The situation was becoming desperate, and Maria found herself in a position where her actions could determine whether the civilian population of the village would survive the day. Her successful shot had bought them some time, but the arriving enemy reinforcements threatened to overwhelm all the defensive positions. Maria made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation she possessed. Instead of falling back to safety with the rest of Alpha Squad, she positioned herself in an abandoned watchtower that offered a commanding view of all the approaches to the village. The tower was dangerously exposed, but it was the only position from which she could effectively engage the incoming enemy reinforcements. "Santos, get back here immediately," Rodriguez ordered when he realized what she was planning. "You can't take on 20 fighters by yourself." But Maria was already climbing the wooden ladder to the top of the watchtower, her rifle slung across her back and extra ammunition weighing down her gear. "Someone has to slow them down," she replied through her radio. "If they reach the village before we can establish a new defensive line, those families don't have a chance." She could hear the concern in Rodriguez's voice, but she also knew that he understood the tactical reality of their situation. From the top of the watchtower, Maria had an incredible view of the entire battlefield. She could see Alpha Squad retreating to a secondary defensive position closer to the village. Bravo Squad was regrouping after their successful breakout from the enemy encirclement. Charlie Squad was setting up heavy weapons to cover the likely enemy approach routes, but she could also see the enemy reinforcements moving through the forest with alarming speed and coordination. These weren't the same fighters they had been engaging earlier. This group moved with the precision of elite troops, using advanced tactics and communication equipment. They were clearly the enemy's best soldiers, brought in to complete the mission that the initial attack force had failed to accomplish. Maria began engaging targets at the maximum effective range of her rifle, trying to slow the enemy advance without exposing herself unnecessarily. Her first shot dropped the lead scout at nearly 300 yards. an impressive display of marksmanship that immediately got the attention of the entire enemy force. The enemy responded by spreading out and taking cover, which was exactly what Maria had hoped for. By forcing them to move more cautiously, she was buying precious time for the other squads to prepare their defenses. But she had also made herself the primary target for every enemy fighter in the area. Heavy automatic weapons fire began raking the watchtower, splintering the wooden structure and sending debris flying in all directions. Maria pressed herself against the floor of the tower as bullets passed through the walls just inches above her head. The entire structure shook under the impact of sustained enemy fire. During a brief lull in the incoming fire, Maria rose to take another shot. She had identified what appeared to be the enemy commander, a figure who was directing the movement of other fighters through hand signals and radio communications. Eliminating the leader might disrupt their coordinated attack and give the defending forces a better chance of success. The shot was extremely difficult, nearly 270 yards, through dense forest cover with multiple obstacles between her position and the target. Maria had to calculate not just the distance and wind conditions, but also the trajectory needed to thread the bullet between tree branches and undergrowth. She took careful aim, accounting for every variable she could identify. The enemy commander was moving between covered positions, only briefly visible as he coordinated his forces. Maria waited for the perfect moment when he paused to observe the village defenses through his binoculars. When the shot came, it was perfect. The enemy commander dropped immediately, and Maria could see the confusion that spread through the attacking force as subordinates tried to figure out what had happened to their leader. The coordinated advance began to falter as different groups of fighters lost their central direction. But Maria's success came at a terrible cost. The enemy had finally pinpointed her exact location, and they began concentrating all their firepower on the watchtower. The wooden structure couldn't withstand the sustained assault from multiple heavy weapons. Support beams began to crack and splinter under the impact of hundreds of rounds. "Santos, the tower is coming down." Chen's voice crackled through her radio. "You need to get out of there right now." Maria could feel the entire structure swaying dangerously, and she knew that Chen was right. The tower would collapse within minutes, possibly seconds. But as she prepared to climb down, Maria noticed something that changed everything. A group of enemy fighters had broken away from the main force and were approaching the village from a completely different direction, one that none of the defensive positions could cover effectively. If these fighters reached the village, they would be able to attack the civilian population directly. There were at least 8 fighters in this group, all moving quickly toward a cluster of houses where Maria knew several families with young children were sheltering. The other squads were too far away to intercept them, and by the time anyone could reposition to respond to this threat, it would be too late. Maria made a split-second decision that surprised even herself. Instead of climbing down from the collapsing tower, she aimed her rifle at the group threatening the civilian houses. The range was extreme, over 300 yards, and the tower was shaking so violently that maintaining steady aim seemed impossible. She fired 3 rapid shots, adjusting her aim between each one as the tower continued to sway. The first shot missed, but the second struck one of the enemy fighters in the leg, causing him to fall and slowing the entire group. The third shot was even more accurate, dropping the lead fighter and forcing the others to take cover. Just as Maria fired her 4th shot, the watchtower finally gave way. The main support beam snapped with a sound like thunder, and the entire structure began to collapse. Maria felt herself falling through the air, still clutching her rifle as wooden debris crashed down around her. She hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively to absorb the impact as she had been taught during paratrooper training. Pain shot through her left shoulder and ribs, but she forced herself to keep moving as chunks of the destroyed tower continued to fall around her position. "Santos. Santos, respond!" Rodriguez's voice came through her radio with desperate urgency. "Are you alive?" Maria tried to respond, but the wind had been knocked out of her lungs by the impact. She could only gasp for air while trying to assess her injuries and determine if she could still fight. The enemy fighters who had been approaching the civilian houses were regrouping. Apparently believing that the threat from the watchtower had been eliminated, they began moving toward the village again, but more cautiously now that they knew a skilled marksman was operating in the area. Maria forced herself to stand, ignoring the pain in her shoulder and the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Her rifle had survived the fall and she still had several magazines of ammunition. The mission wasn't over yet. and innocent lives still hung in the balance. She found cover behind the rubble of the collapsed tower and prepared to continue the fight. The enemy fighters were only about 100 yards from the nearest houses now, close enough that Maria could see their faces clearly through her rifle scope. These weren't just soldiers, they were killers who had come to terrorize innocent families. With grim determination, Maria began engaging the enemy fighters one by one, using every bit of skill and training she possessed to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. From her position behind the rubble of the collapsed watchtower, Maria began the most intense firefight of her life. The enemy fighters approaching the village houses were now aware that she had survived the tower's destruction, and they split into two groups to attack her from different angles while continuing their advance toward the civilians. Despite the pain from her injuries and the overwhelming odds against her, Maria's training took over completely. She moved between different firing positions within the rubble, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to get an accurate fix on her location. Her shots were precise and calculated, each one designed to disrupt the enemy's advance while conserving her limited ammunition. The first enemy fighter fell at 90 yards, struck in the chest as he tried to rush across open ground toward the nearest house. The second went down at 80 yards when Maria's bullet caught him as he attempted to provide covering fire for his companions. But the remaining fighters were learning from these losses, moving more carefully and using better cover. "Santos, we're moving to support you," Rodriguez's voice came through her radio. "Hold your position for 2 more minutes." But Maria could see that the enemy fighters would reach the civilian houses long before Alpha Squad could arrive to help. She was running out of time and options. One of the enemy fighters had managed to reach the corner of the nearest house and was preparing to breach the door where Maria knew a family of 5 was hiding. She could see a small child's face peering out through a crack in a boarded window, eyes wide with terror at the approaching danger. Maria shifted her position to get a clear shot at the fighter near the house, but the angle was difficult and her injured shoulder was affecting her accuracy. She took careful aim, knowing that this shot had to be perfect because there would be no second chance. The bullet struck the enemy fighter center mass, dropping him instantly just as he was about to break down the door, but his death cry alerted the other fighters to Maria's new position, and they immediately concentrated their fire on her location. The rubble around her exploded in a shower of concrete and wooden splinters as automatic weapons fire tore through her cover. Maria was forced to move again, but her options were becoming limited. The remaining enemy fighters had positioned themselves to cover all the obvious escape routes from the rubble pile. She was effectively trapped, with only a few minutes of ammunition remaining and no clear way to continue protecting the civilian houses. That's when she noticed something that gave her one last desperate idea. During the watchtower's collapse, several large wooden beams had fallen in such a way that they created a partially covered pathway leading away from the rubble pile. If she could crawl through this makeshift tunnel, she might be able to reach a position that would give her a better angle on the remaining enemy fighters. The pathway was dangerous. It was only partially covered and would require her to move through an area where enemy fire was concentrated, but it was her only chance to continue the fight and protect the innocent families who were counting on her. Maria began crawling through the wooden tunnel, dragging her rifle behind her as bullets whined overhead. Splinters rained down from the damaged beams as enemy rounds impacted just inches above her head. The pain in her shoulder was excruciating, but she forced herself to keep moving toward the far end of the makeshift passage. Halfway through the tunnel, Maria heard a sound that filled her with horror, the splintering crash of a door being broken down, followed by terrified screams from inside one of the houses. The remaining enemy fighters had reached the civilian population, and innocent people were about to pay the price for her failure to stop them. With a surge of desperate energy, Maria burst out of the wooden tunnel and immediately engaged the enemy fighters who had broken into the house. The range was point blank, less than 30 yards, and her shots were devastatingly accurate. 2 fighters fell before they even realized she had flanked their position, but as she engaged these targets, the remaining enemy fighters zeroed in on her new position. Maria found herself caught in a crossfire with nowhere to take cover. Bullets were impacting all around her as she tried to eliminate the last threats to the civilian population. Just as her situation seemed hopeless, the heavy weapons of Charlie Squad opened fire from their position near the village center. The coordinated fire from multiple machine guns and grenade launchers swept through the area where the remaining enemy fighters had taken position, eliminating them in a matter of seconds. Area secure. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio as Alpha Squad finally reached Maria's position. Santos, what's your status? Maria tried to respond, but exhaustion and her injuries were finally catching up with her. She collapsed behind a bullet-scarred wall, her rifle still clutched in her hands. Rodriguez found her there moments later, alive but barely conscious. You did it, he said with a mixture of amazement and respect. You held them off long enough for us to get into position. Those families are alive because of what you did here today. As medics arrived to treat her injuries, Maria looked toward the houses where the civilian families were emerging from their hiding places. Children ran to their parents. Elderly couples embraced with tears of relief, and mothers held their babies closer. All of them were safe because one small soldier had refused to give up when everything seemed impossible. Word of Maria's actions spread quickly through the military base. The story of how she had used rocks as weapons when her rifle jammed, eliminated an enemy commander at extreme range, and single-handedly held off an entire enemy squad to protect civilians, became legendary among the troops. But more importantly, it changed how everyone saw her. She was no longer the small, uncertain recruit who had struggled through basic training. She was a warrior who had proven that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. Her fellow soldiers looked at her with genuine respect and admiration, knowing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Months later, when Maria returned home to visit her family, she carried herself differently. The confidence she had discovered in combat stayed with her in civilian life. Her younger brother, now fully recovered from his surgery, told everyone he met about his sister, the war hero. Her mother still worried, but she was also proud of the strong, capable woman her daughter had become. Maria continued her military service, eventually becoming an instructor who taught other soldiers that true strength comes not from physical size or aggressive attitude, but from the willingness to do what's right no matter how difficult or dangerous it might be. Her story inspired countless other recruits who felt like they didn't fit the traditional soldier mold. Years later, when people asked Maria about that day in the battle, she would always say the same thing. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to do my job and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. But everyone who heard her story knew that what she had accomplished that day was nothing short of extraordinary, proving that heroes come in all sizes and that courage is not about the absence of fear, but about doing what's right despite being afraid.